The war had consumed 17 cycles of the Galactic Standard Calendar, and still there was no end in sight. The Ven diplomats sat in their crystalline chambers, analyzing battle data with their methodical precision, while the Thracker warriors sharpened their honor blades and prepared for another season of carefully orchestrated combat. The Kuvath Dominion held the eastern spiral arm with an iron grip that refused to break no matter how many fleets the Galactic Council threw against. Their defensive line ships burned in the void between stars, and entire worlds became graveyards, but the front lines barely moved. Was civilized warfare in its purest form, with both sides adhering to the ancient accords that governed conflict? Between spacefaring races, no weapons of mass extinction, no targeting of civilian population centers, no use of artificial intelligence in combat systems. Both sides fought with honor and precision, and both sides bled for every meter of contested space ambassador. Chen of Earth stood before the council chambers for the 14th time in as many cycles and made the same offer her predecessors had made. Humanity wishes to contribute to the defense of civilized space, she said in flawless galactic standard. The council members shifted in their seats with that particular body language that meant polite dismissal was coming high. Chancellor Vexner of the Ven Collective spoke first, as he always did. His voice carried the musical quality of his species, but the words were condescending. Ambassador Chen, we appreciate Earth's enthusiasm, but this conflict requires sophisticated military doctrine and adherence to protocols that take centuries to master. War Master Kasarik of the Thracker clans leaned forward with his forearms crossed in the traditional posture of skeptical assessment. Your species has been in space for less than 2 generations. He rumbled, you fight among yourselves over resources and ideology. The accords of warfare are sacred, and we cannot risk violations by those who do not understand their importance. Chen maintained her diplomatic smile, though her jaw tightened. Almost imperceptibly, with respect, War Master, we understand conflict very well. Perhaps too well. She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's military history. The council members glanced at it with disinterest. Wars fought with chemical weapons, nuclear exchanges that scarred countenance, conflicts that consumed entire generations. To them, it looked primitive and barbaric. This is precisely why we must decline, Vexner said gently. You have not yet learned to fight with honor. The vote was unanimous, as it had been 13 times before. Ambassador Chen bowed respectfully and returned to her quarters in the diplomatic sector. She composed her report to Earth Command with practiced efficiency. Another rejection, another cycle of watching from the sidelines while the galaxy burned. 3 days later, everything changed. The Kuvath launched Operation Broken Chain. Their fleets emerged from dark space at coordinates that should have been impossible for them to know. Someone had sold intelligence, or the Kuvath had broken council encryption in their way. The result was catastrophic. Core worlds of the Thracker clans came under direct assault. 6 colony worlds belonging to the Ven Collective were simultaneously invaded. The carefully maintained battle lines collapsed as Kuvath forces drove deep into council territory. Their empress had apparently tired of the stalemate and decided that the accords were an impediment to Victoria. Kuvath soldiers dropped onto civilian centers. Their ships bombarded population zones. Rules of civilized warfare were being rewritten in blood and fire. High Chancellor Vexner called an emergency session of the council. His crystalline features showed cracks of stress that his species rarely displayed in public. We are facing extinction if we cannot mount an effective defense within the next 2 cycles, he announced. Our fleets are scattered, responding to threats across 17 systems. Our projections show total collapse within 8 cycles. War Master Kesarak stood with unusual heaviness in his movement. 3 of his clan worlds were under siege, and his honor demanded he be there defending them. Instead, duty kept him at the council chambers. We need reinforcements, he said simply. We need forces that can respond with the same disregard for the accords that the Kuvaths have shown. The chamber fell silent. Then Ambassador Chen's voice cut through the quiet. Humanity renews its offer of military assistance. Every head turned toward her. Vexenor's crystalline eyes flickered with calculations running through his enhanced mind. Your fleet strength is minimal compared to what we need, he said. Chen smiled, and it was not a diplomatic expression. We don't need a large fleet, she replied. We need permission to fight our way. The council debated for 6 hours. Members argued that accepting human help would compromise their moral authority. Others pointed out that moral authority meant nothing if they were all dead or enslaved. In the end, survival instinct won over pride. The vote passed with only 2 abstentions. Humanity was authorized to commit military forces to the defense of Council space, but there would be a test first. The system of Draxus 7 was under imminent threat from a Kuvath battle group. It was a minor colony world with minimal strategic value, but it was predicted to fall within days if humanity could defend it successfully. The Council would consider broader military cooperation. Ambassador Chen accepted the terms without negotiation. Within 18 hours, the first human ships began arriving in Dr. AXXIS-7WARMASTER Kasarek observed their arrival from his command ship. With growing bewilderment, the human fleet was a mess. Ships of different designs and classifications moved in formations that seemed almost random. Some vessels looked like they had been military transports hastily converted to warships. Others bristled with weapons in configurations that violated every principle of efficient design. There was no uniformity of color or markings beyond a simple Earth sigil. This is what they send to defend a system. One of his tactical officers muttered. The human commanding officer introduced herself over the channel as Admiral Rodriguez. She was young by Council standards and wore a uniform that looked lived in rather than ceremonial. War Master Kasarek, she said with a slight nod, "We're here to keep this rock out of Kuvath's hands. Your fleet disposition is chaotic." Kasarek observed. Rodriguez grinned. "Yeah, we get that a lot. Don't worry, we know what we're doing." The Kuvath arrived 36 hours later with overwhelming numerical superiority. Their ships moved in the precise geometric formations that characterized Dominion military doctrine. Admiral Rodriguez ordered her fleet to scatter. Kasarek watched in disbelief as human ships broke formation and fled in apparently random directions. It looked like a rout before the battle had even begun. Then the Kuvath fleet entered weapons range, and everything changed. The fleeing human ships suddenly weren't where the Kuvath targeting systems said they should be. Sensor ghosts multiplied across the tactical display. False engine signatures bloomed throughout the system. Kuvath fleet fired on targets that didn't exist while the real human ships maneuvered into attack positions. That should have been impossible when the humans struck back. They didn't aim for enemy shields or weapon systems. They waste targeted sensor arrays and communication relays. They broadcast surrender signals on Kuvath frequencies, then ambushed the ships. That responded. They used debris fields as cover and launched kinetic projectiles from angles that Council doctrine said were non-optimal. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't honorable, it was brutally effective. 8 hours after the engagement began, the Kuvath battle group was gone, not retreated, gone, destroyed, or captured with such efficiency that Kasarek had to review the tactical data 3 times to believe it. Admiral Rodriguez contacted him after the battle. She looked tired but satisfied. System secure. War Master, we'll stick around to help with cleanup if you want. Kasarek stared at her for a long moment. How did you do that? He finally asked. Rodriguez shrugged. We fought to win, not to look good doing it. That night, Kasarek filed his report. To the Council, his recommendation was brief and carried the weight of his clan's authority. Humanity should be given full military command, not because they fought with honor, but because they fought like they actually wanted to survive. The human fleet that assembled at Rally Point Sigma was larger than anyone expected. War Master Kasarek watched from the observation deck of his flagship as vessel after vessel emerged from dark space transit. They came in groups rather than organized formations. Old Earth destroyers that looked like they had seen action in humanity's pre-contact wars. Sleek carriers that seemed brand new with fresh armor plating. Bulk transports that had been converted into something the Thacker tactical computers couldn't quite classify. They have no standardization. His tactical officer observed with disapproval. Each ship class is different. There's no uniformity of design or doctrine. Kasarek said nothing, but his minds were working through implications. They'd been in space for less than 50 standard years, yet they had built a fleet from dozens of different design philosophies. It spoke to either chaos or adaptability. He suspected it was both. The human soldiers who came aboard his flagship for the joint briefing were equally perplexing. They wore armor that was functional rather than ceremonial, honor markings, no clan insignias names, and rank indicators. They moved with casual efficiency that seemed almost disrespectful until Kesserak realized they were constantly scanning their environment eyes, tracking exits, hands never far from weapons, bodies positioned to respond to threats from any direction. These were not parade ground soldiers. They were predators pretending to be civilized. General Sarah Okonkwo commanded the human ground forces. She was tall for her species, with skin the color of deep earth and eyes that missed nothing when she shook hands with Kesserak. Her grip was firm, and her gaze was direct. War Master, she said, thank you for trusting us with this opportunity. I do not trust you. Kesserak replied honestly, I simply recognize that we are losing, and you know how to win. Okonkwo smiled, that's fair enough. Let's talk about how we're going to end this war. The briefing room filled with council, military leaders, and human commanders. High Chancellor Vexener attended remotely from the Ven homeworld. His holographic form flickered slightly as encryption protocols maintained secure communications. The situation is grave. Vexener began. Kuvath forces now control 42% of contested space. Our projections show complete collapse within 11 cycles unless we achieve a significant strategic victory. He brought up tactical displays showing the front lines red. Zones indicating Kuvath control were spreading like an infection. We need to regain the initiative. A Ven admiral said, push them back, system by system, until we restore the original defensive positions. General Okonkwo leaned back in her chair. That will take years and cost millions of lives. She said flatly, do you have a better suggestion? The Ven admiral asked with barely concealed irritation. Yes. Okonkwo stood and walked to the holographic display. A gesture, she zoomed out to show the entire spiral arm. We stop playing defense and go straight for the throat, she highlighted. A system deep in Kuvath space, the throne world, the capital of the Dominion and seat of the Empress who ruled their entire civilization. The room erupted in objections. That is suicide. A Thracker clan leader stated the throne world is defended by 17 fleet groups in orbital defense platforms that could destroy an armada attacking it. Violates the accords. Another voice added, it is a civilian population center. Okonkwo waited for the noise to die down. The accords are already broken, she said quietly. The Kuvath violated them when they attacked your core worlds. Fighting by rules your enemy has abandoned is just slow suicide. Kesserak studied the tactical display. His warrior's mind saw the audacity of the plan and also its terrible logic. You are proposing a decapitation strike. Hisade Okonkwo nodded. We take out their leadership and command infrastructure in one coordinated assault. Without the Empress, the Dominion will fragment. They're an autocratic society built on absolute loyalty to their ruler. Remove her and the whole structure collapses. How many civilians will die in such an attack? Vexener asked. His crystalline features showed deep concern. Fewer than will die if this war continues for another decade. Okonkwo replied, I won't lie to you, Chancellor. This will be brutal. This will be fast and violent, and it will break every rule of civilized warfare you hold sacred. But it will end the war. The silence that followed was heavy. These were species that had spent millennia developing codes of honor and rules of engagement. The idea of targeting an enemy capital in a blitz assault was fundamentally opposed to everything they believed about proper conduct of war, but they were also dying. How long would such an operation take? Kesserak Okonkwo looked at her staff officers. One of them brought up a tactical timeline. From jump to extraction, we estimate 5 hours. She said. The room exploded again. 5 hours to assault the most heavily defended system in Kuvath space was insanity. Explain. Vexener Demanda Okonkwo's staff officer was a compact man with the calcine ghost. He walked them through the plan. With clinical precision, Phase 1, electronic warfare saturation. We jump in at the system edge and immediately blanket everything with jamming and false signals. The Kuvath will be fighting blind. Phase 2, kinetic bombardment of orbital defenses. We use relativistic kill vehicles to take out their platforms before they can target our fleet. Phase 3, ground insertions. Special operations teams drop onto key command centers and neutralize Dominion leadership. Phase 4, capture the Empress. Phase 5, broadcaster surrender and extract. Total time, 5 hours. Ven military strategist was shaking his head. The computational power required to coordinate such an assault is beyond our current capabilities. He said you would need AI assistance, and AI in military systems violates the Accords. Ghost smiled. It was not a friendly expression. We don't use AI. He said we use something better at humans. He explained the human command structure networked communications, allowing instant tactical adjustments. Commanders authorized to make independent decisions within mission parameters. Soldiers trained to adapt and improvise rather than follow rigid doctrine. You fight like a hive mind, but with individual initiative. Kasarek said slowly, exactly. Okonkwo confirmed we're really good at organized chaos. The debate continued for 3 more hours. Council members raised objection after objection. The plan was too risky, too violent, too dishonorably. Conk listened patiently and then said something that cut through every argument. You asked us to save you. We don't do half measures. Either give us command and let us fight our way, or send us home. But decide now, because every day you wait is another day. The Kuvath dig in deeper. High Chancellor Vexener consulted privately with the other council leaders. The holographic displays flickered as secure channels carried heated discussions. When Vexener returned, his crystalline features showed the cracks of stress. The council grants humanity operational command for a single strike operation against the Kuvath throne world. He announced, all council forces will support this operation under human strategic direction. However, he paused, and his next words carried the weight of absolute authority. If this fails, the cost will be catastrophic. The survival of our civilizations rests on the success of your plan, General Okonkwo. Okonkwo stood at attention. We won't fail. Shisakisarak watched her and saw something in her eyes that made his warrior's heart both hopeful and afraid. She meant it not as bravado or confidence, but as simple statement of fact. Failure was not an option humans considered once they committed to action. The briefing ended, and the various commanders dispersed to their ships. Kasarak found himself walking with Okonkwo toward the hangar bay. Why did your people really join this war? He asked. You could have stayed neutral and safe on Earth. Okonkwo stopped and looked at him. Because we've seen what happens when you wait too long to fight evil. She said, we've made that mistake before. Never again. She saluted and headed to her transport. Keskrak stood watching the human ships prepare for departure. He thought about honor and rules and civilized warfare, and he thought about survival. In 3 days they would launch the most audacious military operation in galactic history, led by a species that had been killing each other with rocks and spears just 10,000 years ago. Irony was not lost on him. The galaxy's hope for peace rested in the hands of its most warlike species. The combined fleet assembled at the coordinates Ghost had designated 217 council ships representing every major military power in the galaxy. E3 human vessels that looked like a scrapyard collection compared to the elegant council warships. Warmaster Kasarek commanded the Thacker contingent from his flagship Crimson Honoree. Watched the tactical display as human coordinators positioned the fleet with what seemed like random placement. They are putting our heavy cruisers in the second wave. His tactical officer complained, protocol demands capital ships lead the assault. Human protocol is different. Kesarak replied, he was learning to trust their chaotic methods even when they violated everything he knew about warfare. General Okonkwo's command ship was called Necessity, was an ugly vessel built for function rather than formats. The hull was covered in sensor arrays and communication relays. No weapons visible on the exterior. Kesarak had asked about that during the planning phase. Command and control doesn't need guns. Okonkwo had explained it needs to see everything and talk to everyone. We let the shooters do the shooting now. As final preparations were made, Kesarak reviewed the operation timeline. 5 hours from jump to extraction. It still seemed impossible. His come chimed, and Okonkwo's face appeared on his screen. War Master, we're 30 minutes from jump. She said, your forces ready? The Thacker clan stand prepared. Kesarak replied formally, we will honor our ancestors with our conduct in battle. Okonkwo smiled slightly. Just follow the tactical updates and don't be surprised when things get weird. She said, define weird. Kesarak requested, you'll know it when you see it. The come closed, and Kesarak settled into his command throne. His forearms rested on the control interfaces, His primary hearts beat steady rhythms, his secondary hearts remained calm and reserved. This was what his species was bred for, Warner victory. The countdown reached zero reality, twisted as the entire fleet jumped to dark space for 17 seconds. They traveled between dimensions. Then they emerged at the edge of the Kuvath throne. System alarms immediately screamed across every ship. The system was exactly as heavily defended as intelligence had predicted. 17 fleet groups, orbital platforms, thousands of automated defense drones, and somewhere below on the jeweled world that was the Dominion capital, the Empress sat in her throne room, surrounded by her guards and advisors. Shay had no idea what was about to happen. Phase 1, execute. Okonkwo's voice cut across all command channels. The human electronic warfare corvettes were already moving. They were small ships barely larger than heavy fighters, but they carried equipment that made Council's sensor officers weep with envy. Signals erupted across every frequency. False contacts bloomed like flowers across tactical displays. Kuvath's defensive network went from organized to chaos in under 90 seconds. Enemy forces attempting to clear their sensors. A Ven observer reported from his station on Kesserak's bridge. They are cycling through backup systems, won't matter. Ghost's voice came through on the tactical channel. We're already inside their command loop. They're reacting to what we want them to see. Kesserak watched the display and began to understand. The Kuvath fleet was moving to intercept threats that didn't exist. They were leaving holes in their formation to counter attacks that would never come. Humans weren't just jamming their sensors, they were feeding them false information designed to make them vulnerable. Phase to execute. Okonkwo ordered the kinetic kill vehicles launched. They had been pre-positioned during the jump. Dark and silent, they had been waiting in the system for hours now. They activated their drives and accelerated to relativistic speeds. By the time the Kuvath platforms detected them, it was far too late. The impacts were catastrophic. Orbital defense stations simply ceased to exist. Energy release from objects moving at significant fractions of light speed hitting stationary targets was beyond. Devastated was apocalyptic. Seska felt his honor cringe at the tactic. There was no glory in such weapons. No chance for the enemy to defend or respond, just sudden obliteration, but there was no denying the effectiveness. Defensive perimeter is breached. A tactical officer reported. Kuvath fleet groups are reforming, but their coordination is failing. The human fleet moved forward, not in organized waves, but in what looked like scattered groups. Each group had a specific target, and they moved with absolute confidence. Council ships followed the tactical updates that Ghost was broadcasting. They found themselves in positions they never would have chosen, angles that seemed wrong, approaches that violated doctrine. But every position had a purpose. Kuvath fleet tried to respond, but they were fighting blind. Their sensors showed contradictory information. Their command structure was receiving orders that made no tactical sense, because they were responding to phantom threats when they did manage to target real ships. They found themselves caught in crossfires from directions they hadn't covered. How are the humans coordinating this? Ven Admiral demanded on the command channel. There is too much happening too fast for any single tactical AI, we told you. Ghost replied, we don't use AI. Every ship captain has mission parameters and authority to adapt. We trust our people to think. The battle became a masterclass in human warfare. They used debris as concealment. They broadcast false surrender signals. They hacked Kuvath communication networks and sent contradictory orders. They fired weapons from angles that should have been non-optimal, but caught enemies who were looking the wrong direction. It was dishonorable. It was dishonest. It was brilliantly effective. Phase 3 execute. Okonkwo announced the assault carriers dove toward the throne world. They moved under cover of the fleet engagement, small enough to avoid the heaviest fire, fast enough to get through before Kuvath forces could reposition. Sarah watched as human ground forces began their insertion. They didn't land at safe zones and established beachheads. They dropped directly onto target locations: government buildings, military command centers, communication hubs, the Empress's palace complex. That is suicide, a Thacker officer muttered, dropping into hostile territory with no support. They have support, Quasark replied. Quietly, they have each other. The tactical feed from the ground assault was unlike anything Council forces had ever seen. Human Soldiers moved through Kuvath's defenses like water flowing through cracks. They didn't fight in formation, they didn't hold positions, they advanced in small teams that covered each other with practiced efficiency. When they encountered resistance, they adapted instantly flanking maneuvers, smoke and flash grenades breaching. Charge's psychological warfare broadcasts, they used every advantage and created new ones when needed. The Kovath defenders were brave and well-trained, but they had never fought an enemy that refused to fight fair. Within 2 hours, the human teams had secured every primary objective. The Dominion's central command was offline there. Military coordination was shattered, their communication network was under human control, and the Empress's palace was surrounded. Phase 4, execute. Okonkwo said, her voice was calm, as if ordering coffee rather than the capture of a galactic ruler. Serac switched his display to feed from the palace assault a team of human soldiers in black armor moved through corridors with mechanical precision. They encountered the Empress's personal guard elite warriors, who had trained their entire lives for this moment. The fight was brief and brutal. Human weapons designed for close quarters, shredded armor, tactical coordination allowed them to overwhelm superior numbers. When they breached the throne room, the Empress sat waiting. She was a being of terrible beauty. Species was elegant and deadly. She did not beg or plead. You are human, she said to the team leader. Yes, ma'am, the soldier replied. I am Sergeant Diaz, and you are under arrest for what crime? The Empress demanded. War crimes against civilian populations in council space. Diaz recited, you will be held to answer for those crimes. The Empress laughed. You think capturing me will end this war? My people will fight to the last to free me? Diaz shrugged. Maybe, but we're betting they'd rather have you alive as their leader in negotiations than dead as a martyr. Your choice, really? The Empress looked at him for a long moment, then slowly she stood and extended her hands for restraints. You fight without honor, she said. We fight to win. Diaz replied, there's a difference. Kasarik watched the feed and felt something shift in his understanding.
Humans had just accomplished in 3 hours what should have been impossible.
They had assaulted the most defended system in Kuvath's space. They had neutralized its defenses. They had captured the ruler of an empire, and they had done it with minimal casualties. Because they were stronger or more advanced, but because they thought differently. They didn't fight wars to prove honor or demonstrate prowess. They fought wars to end them. Okonkwo's voice came through calm and professional. Phase 5, execute. All forces begin extraction. Mission timer shows 3 hours 42 minutes elapsed, well ahead of schedule. The fleet began its withdrawal, organized and efficient. The Kuvath forces tried to pursue, but they were too disorganized, too confused, too shocked by what had just happened. As the last human ship jumped to dark space, Kesserak sat in his command throne and processed what he had witnessed. The war wasn't over, not technically, but everyone in that throne system knew the truth. It was finished. Kuvath Dominion would surrender. They had no choice, and it had taken humanity 5 hours to accomplish what the Council couldn't achieve in 17 years. The Kuvath Empress stood in a detention cell that was far more comfortable than she expected. Human guards had provided her with amenities, food, from her homeworld access to communication channels, though heavily monitored. Evan, a window showing the stars. She had expected torture or humiliation. Instead, she got professional courtesy in the strange human concept of prisoner. Right, Sergeant Diaz visited her daily, not to interrogate, but to ensure she was being treated properly. Why do you care how I am kept? She asked him on the third day. You are my enemy? Diaz leaned against the doorframe. You're a prisoner of war, ma'am. He replied, the war part might be over, but that doesn't mean we get to be cruel. We have rules about this stuff. The Empress laughed bitterly. Rules? You've violated every rule of civilized warfare. To capture me, different rules, Diaz said with a shrug. Rules about how we fight versus rules about how we treat people after. We'll break the first kind when we need to, but the second kind are what separate us from monsters. She studied him with ancient eyes. Your species is very young, but you have seen much war. Diaz nodded. Too much. That's why we're good at it, and why we want it to end. Meanwhile, in council space, the news spread like wildfire. The Empress was captured. The throne world had fallen. The Dominion's military command was in complete disarray. Kavath fleet groups were surrendering across contested systems. Some surrendered to council forces. Others simply powered down their weapons and waited for instructions that would never come high. Chancellor Vexener called an emergency session of the council. Every member attended. The chamber filled with representatives who had spent 17 years watching their civilizations slowly die in a war of attrition. Now they faced a different problem. Victory had come so suddenly. They weren't prepared for it. General Okonkwo Vexener addressed the human commander who stood at the center of the chamber. Your operation was successful. Beyond any projection, the Kuvath Dominion has effectively ceased hostile operations. Thank you, Chancellor, Okonkwo replied. She wore her dress uniform and stood with military precision, but her eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had just coordinated the most complex military operation in galactic history. However, we must now address how this war will conclude. Vexener continued, the Empress is in human custody. The Dominion leadership is requesting negotiations. The Council must determine terms for peace. The Ven Admiral spoke up. We should demand unconditional surrender, occupation of their core world's dismantling of their military capability. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. These species had suffered greatly. The desire for retribution was understandably raised her hand, and the chamber quieted with respect. I would advise against those terms. She said, why should we show mercy to those who showed us none? A Thraka representative demanded. Okonkwo looked around the chamber. Because punitive peace terms don't end wars. She said they just set up the next one. She brought up historical data from Earth. The Treaty of Versailles, after the First World War, the harsh terms imposed on the defeated, the economic devastation, the rise of extremism, the Second World War that followed. We learned this lesson the hard way, Okonkwo explained. If you humiliate and destroy the Kuvath, they will spend the next century rebuilding for revenge. If you give them honorable terms and help them recover, they might become allies. The chamber erupted in debate. Some called her naive. Others recognized the wisdom in her words. War Master Kesserak stood from his seat, his forearms spread in a gesture of authority. The human speaks truth. He said, we Thraka have fought blood feuds that lasted millennia. Because of harsh peace terms, entire clans destroyed over ancient insults. Is that what we want with the Kuvath? Eternal enmity? My Chancellor Vexener S. crystalline features flickered as he processed calculations. What terms do you propose, General Okonkwo? Yes, Gita Okonkwo had clearly prepared for this. The Empress will be tried for war crimes, but in a court that includes Kuvath representation. The Dominion will disarm their most aggressive weapon systems but maintain defensive capability. Will pay reparations, but on a schedule that doesn't destroy their economy. Council forces will withdraw from Kuvath space once a transitional government is established, and most importantly, she paused, we offer them membership in the Galactic Council. The chamber exploded, voices shouting over each other, outrage and disbelief competing for dominance. You want us to ally with our enemies. For the noise to subside, I want you to turn enemies into partners. She replied that Kuvath are a proud warrior culture. They respect strength and honor. You've just demonstrated both now. Show them mercy and wisdom. Give them a reason to work with you instead of against you, Ambassador. Chen stepped forward. She had been silent during the military operation, but now her diplomatic expertise was needed. The Council has an opportunity to expand its influence peacefully. She said the Kuvath have resources and territory, have military strength and cultural achievements. Why waste that through destruction when you could incorporate it through cooperation? The debate continued for hours. Ven representatives running probability calculation, Shrock warriors arguing about honor and justice, representatives from smaller species worried about Kuvath. Resentimenser watched Okonkwo during the discussions. She stood patiently answering questions. Concerns never pushing too hard, but also never backing down from her position. You have done this before, he said to her during a recess. Turned enemies into allies. Okonkwo nodded. After World War II, the United States helped rebuild Japan and Germany. Countries that had been bitter enemies became close partners. It took time and effort, but it worked better than the alternative. Kazarik considered this. Your species has wisdom born of much suffering. He observed Okonkwo's expression grew somber. Every human alive carries the genetic memory of 10,000 years of tribal warfare. We killed each other over resources and religion and pride. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times, everything. We know about war we learned by doing it wrong. First, the council session resumed after 8 more hours of debate. A vote was called. The measure passed by a narrow margin. The Kuvath would be offered honorable peace terms. The Empress would face justice. But in a fair trial, the Dominion would be invited to join the council as a provisional member, and humanity would oversee the transition process. 3 days later, Ambassador Chen met with the Kuvath diplomatic delegation. They arrived under flag of truce, proud and unbowed, despite their defeat. The lead negotiator was a military commander named Vakhtar. Had lost 3 of his clutch brothers in the war. "You are the humans who defeated us," he said to Chen. "We are the humans who want to end this war properly," Chen replied. "So it never starts again." Vakhtar studied her. "The Empress told us you fight without honor." Chen smiled slightly. "We fight to win, but we make peace to last. Those required different approaches." The negotiations took 2 weeks. Kuvath delegates were initially hostile, expecting harsh terms, preparing for humiliation instead. They found humans willing to compromise, willing to understand their cultural needs, willing to structure reparations around their economic capacity. "Why do you do this?" Vakhtar asked Chen. "During a private discussion, your people could demand anything." "We hold all the leverage." Chen poured tea for both, a theme, a human custom that seemed to relax tensions. "Because we want partners, not subjects," she said. "Because we know that today's enemy might be tomorrow's friend. Because we're tired of war, and we suspect you are too." Vakhtar was silent for a long moment. "The Dominion has fought for supremacy for 300 years. He finally said it. "Is what we were taught to value strength and conquest? Maybe it's time to learn to value something else." Chen suggested, like cooperation, like building instead of destroying. Vakhtar looked at his tea. The Empress said, "You humans were young and foolish. I think perhaps you are young and wise. The difference being that you still remember what it cost to learn your lessons." Chen raised her cup to learning lessons, and to not repeating them. Vakhtar raised his own cup, an ancient human gesture of peace performed by a former enemy to new beginnings. He said the treaty was signed 1 month after the 5-hour assault. Kuvath Dominion formally surrendered. The Empress abdicated and agreed to face trial. Transitional government took power with promises of democratic reforms. Reparations were scheduled over 50 years, and the Dominion was granted provisional council membership. War that had consumed 17 years ended not with vengeful triumph, but with cautious hope, and humanity had shown the galaxy their ability to wage war. They had shown wisdom in making peace. 6 months after the treaty was signed, Ambassador Chen stood in the council chambers watching humanity's formal admission ceremony. Earth was becoming a full member of the Galactic Council. No longer observers or probationary allies, full members with voting rights and responsibilities. High Chancellor Vexener presided over the ceremony with appropriate dignity. "Humanity has proven itself a worthy addition to our civilization," he announced, "through courage in battle and wisdom in peace. They have earned their place among us." The assembled representatives applauded, though Chen noticed some did so more enthusiastically than others. The scars of war healed slowly, even when the wounds were political rather than physical. After the ceremony, War Master Kesserak approached her. He wore formal clan regalia that marked him as a hero of the recent war. 3 new honor scars decorated his primary arms. Ambassador Chen, he greeted her with a bow that showed genuine respect. War Master Kesserak. She replied, "I hope you're here to celebrate, and not to raise concerns." Kesserak's mandibles clicked in what his species used as a smile. "I am here to speak truth," said. "As is my way." They walked together to a private balcony overlooking the diplomatic quarterships. From 100 species moved through the orbital traffic patterns, the diversity of the galaxy on display. "What truth did you want to share?" Kesserak was silent for a moment. "Your species frightens us," he finally said. "Chan had expected this conversation eventually." "Because we're good at war?" she asked. "Because you were too good at it." Kesserak turned to face her directly. "The Thraka have fought for honor for 10,000 years. The Ven have studied warfare as a science for longer, but you humans," he paused, "you treat war as a problem to be solved rather than a contest to be won, and that makes you more dangerous than any weapon." Chen considered her response carefully. "You're right too. Be cautious," she said. "Humans have a dark history. We've done terrible things to each other. But that's exactly why we understand the cost. Kesserak gestured toward the stars. The council debated for 3 months after the treaty was signed about what role humanity should have going forward. Some wanted you restricted to defensive operations.
Others
Wanted you given full military authority. What did you want? Chen asked. I wanted the council to understand what you really are. Keserak's voice was thoughtful. You are not warriors seeking glory. You are survivors who learned to fight because you had no choice. There is a difference. Chen smiled sadly. Every species in the galaxy evolved through competition, but most of you had natural allies, Hive. Species that cooperated from the start. Peaceful herbivores that learned to work together. She looked out at the stars. Earth was different. We had no natural allies. Every advantage we gained, we fought for. Every tool we made could be a weapon. We learned to see threats everywhere, because threats were everywhere. That sounds exhausting. Kesserak observed it was. That's why we're so good at war. And why we're so desperate for peace. A ship passed by the balcony. Its hull markings identified it as Kuvath, part of their new trading fleet 6 months ago. That ship would have been carrying weapons. Now it carried goods for exchange. The Kuvaths are adapting to peace faster than we expected. Kesserak said, your people's guidance has been valuable. We've had practice. Chen replied, after our last global war, we had to figure out how to turn enemies into partners. It took time, but it worked. Kesserak turned to look at her with awe. For of his eyes there is something the council needs to understand about humanity, and I am not certain they do. What's that? You showed restraint during the assault on the throne world. Chen's expression didn't change, but her eyes showed she understood. You noticed I am a warrior. I notice when an enemy pulls their strikes. Kesserak's voice grew quieter. You could have destroyed that world. Your kinetic weapons could have targeted the surface. Your soldiers could have killed far more, but you chose precision over devastation. Chen nodded slowly. We wanted to end the war, not commit genocide. There's a difference. That is what frightens us most. Kesserak said, not your capability, but your choice to limit it, because it means you know exactly how much destruction you can cause. And you consciously hold back. He paused. The question the council asks itself is, what happens if humanity ever decides not to hold back? Chen met his gaze directly. Then you'll see what we're really capable of, and pray you never do. The honesty of her answer seemed to satisfy Kesserak. At least you do not pretend to be harmless. I appreciate that. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Kesserak spoke again. There is a proposal being discussed in council chambers, a new position created specifically for humanity. Oh, Chen asked. Peacekeepers. Kesserak explained the concept. When conflicts arose between council species, humanity would be called in to mediate, as warriors but as advisors, species who understood both war and peace, who could see solutions others might miss. The irony is not lost on me. Kesserak said, the youngest and most violent species being asked to keep peace. But after watching you work, I understand the logic. You don't just know how to fight. You know why fighting should be the last resort. Chen thought about the proposal. We'd need independence to do it properly. Can't be seen as taking sides. That is understood. And we'd need authority to enforce peace if mediation fails. Kesserak's mandibles clicked again. No one wants to see what happens when humanity is authorized to enforce peace. That threat alone might prevent most conflicts a week later. Chen attended a small private gathering. General Okonkwo was their ghost, and his special operations team, Agent, Chen Sergeant Diaz, who had captured the Empress, surprisingly Voctor, the former Kuvath military commander. They met in a human-style restaurant that had opened in the diplomatic quarter. Novelty of human cuisine was becoming popular. I never thought I would share a meal with the people who defeated me. Voctor said he was trying something called pizza and seemed confused by it. War makes strange friendships. Okonkwo replied, some of my closest friends were former enemies. Your species does this often, Okta asked. Makes peace with those you fought? Diaz laughed. It's kind of our specialty. Fight hard, make peace, work harder. Ghost raised his glass to the 5-hour war. May it be the last one we need to fight. They drank to that, but Chen noticed the careful way everyone held their glasses ready. To move ready to react, heaven. In peace, humans never quite stopped being ready for war. What will you do now, General? Factor asked. Okonkwo, go home. She replied, spend time with family. Try to forget some of what I've seen. Can you forget? Dr. Sketakonkwo shook her head no. But I can try to make sure the next generation doesn't have to remember wars like we do later that night. Chen stood alone on the observation deck of the Earth Embassy, thought about the journey that had brought humanity to this point, from single world fighting itself to a galactic power, from isolation to integration, from war to peace. Her communicator chimed a message from Earth Command. They were recalling the military forces no longer needed for active combat. The war was truly over, but Chen knew the truth. War was over, but humanity's real test was just beginning. The galaxy had seen what humans could do in war. No, they would see what humans could do in peace, and that might be even more revolutionary. She thought about Kesserak's question, what happens when humanity decides not to hold back? The answer was simple. Humanity would hold back not because they lacked the capability, but because they had learned through 10,000 years of blood and fire that restraint was not weakness, was wisdom. The scars of human history taught lessons the galaxy was only beginning to learn, that the strongest weapon was knowing when not to use it, that true victory was turning enemies into allies, that peace was harder to maintain than war was to wage. Chan looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, species were watching humanity with fear and hope in equal measure, wondering what this young violent species would do next. She smiled. They would do what humans had always done, survive at Aptand. Try to be better tomorrow than they were today. The 5-hour war had ended, but humanity's long journey toward becoming worthy of the galaxy's trust was just beginning, and Chen suspected that journey would take far longer than any war, but it would be worth it. Down in the human military barracks, Sergeant Diaz checked on his team one last time before lights out. They were packing their gear for the journey home. Think we'll be back? One of them asked. Diaz shrugged. Hope not, but if we are needed, we'll be ready. That was the human way. Hope for peace. Prepare for war. Ever forget that the cost of freedom was eternal vigilance, but also never forget that the goal was peace, not glory, not conquest, just peace. The galaxy was learning what humanity had always known, that the species who fought hardest for peace were those who understood war best, and as Earth's ships prepared to return home, the council chambers echoed with a new debate, not about how to fight the next war, but about how to prevent a Tand. For the first time in galactic history, the debate was being led by the youngest species, the most violent species. That had ended a 17-year war in 5 hours. Humanity, the galaxy's newest hope, and its most necessary reminder that peace was not the absence of capability, was the choice to build instead of destroy, cooperate instead of conquer, to turn yesterday's enemies into tomorrow's friends. The stars shone bright over Earth, and for the first time in human history, humanity looked up at them without fear, but with hope that the next chapter would be better than the last.